you all for coming. It is so fun to get to come back to New York again. I felt so lucky to get to come and do an event here when the hardcover came out, and I was absolutely stunned and thrilled to get to come back again. And it's particularly fun to see a lot of familiar faces among you tonight. First, I thought that maybe I should tell you a little bit about how I came to write about food, how I came to be interested in food. I think that probably all of us share at least one thing in common here tonight, and that's that we all really care about food, and that we can probably all agree on the idea that food is in a lot of ways who we are and where we come from. And that's certainly something that I found to be very true in my own life. I grew up in a family of avid home cooks. At least from a food point of view, the way that I was raised was pretty wonderful. My family sat down and ate dinner together every night, and we were pretty freaky about food. We were definitely the type of people who planned tomorrow night's dinner tonight and breakfast the next day during dinner. My family took food a little further than maybe normal people did. I became really interested in why it was that my family was that way. They had always had food magazines and cookbooks stacked up all over the place, on the coffee table, under the coffee table, on ottomans, everywhere. And I started paying more attention to them, sort of leafing through them when I was maybe like 15 or 16. And I was writing a lot of really regrettable poetry around that time. And none of it is in this book, thank goodness. I was writing poetry about wanting to like immerse myself in a vat of marshmallow fluff and things like that. And I slowly started cooking myself. And by the time I went off to college, I was really thoroughly confused about what I was supposed to be doing with my life. It had always been really important to me to be a good student and to sort of, measure up in these very like standard educational ways. And there was no space for food or cooking in there, being good at cooking or enjoying cooking didn't show for anything in college or really anywhere else. And so, I had other interests, and I was studying human biology and whatnot, but every night I would get home, and after I was done with my reading, what I wanted to do was read the newest food magazine that came out, or I wanted to cook something. I wanted to be thinking about food. And at a certain point, when I was about 20, I thought to myself, okay, well, we gotta figure this out. Clearly, maybe you're supposed to go to culinary school. I thought that if you're interested in food, the only option really is maybe to become a chef. And I called up one of my brothers. He lives in Washington, D.C., and he owns 5 restaurants. And he went to the Culinary Institute, and I said, I think I'm supposed to be a chef. And he wisely pointed out that I had never worked in a restaurant. And I'm eternally grateful to him for that, because he sort of gave me a very important push toward trying that out, toward working in a restaurant. And I was really lucky in that through a friend of a friend, I got introduced to one of the chefs at a restaurant called Green's in San Francisco. It's a very well-known vegetarian restaurant. I don't know why on earth they let me in the door, because I didn't know what I was doing. But they took me in, and I worked there, unpaid, 2 days a week, the summer after my sophomore year. And I was working what's called the pantry station. I was doing all the starters and desserts, and I was working with really amazing, inspired and inspiring people, and I got to eat a lot of leftover cake at the end of the night, and that was very nice. But I hated it, and this was very surprising and sort of all the more confusing to me. I felt like here I am getting to spend 8 hours a day, 2 days a week, up to my elbows in food, beautiful food, and I didn't like it. I hadn't realized, I think of course we all know instinctively that there are some major differences between a home kitchen and a professional kitchen. A lot of the time when you're working in a traditional restaurant kitchen that's very separate from the dining room, you don't ever see anybody eating your food. You hand off the plate to a waiter and it's gone. And I hadn't realized that a lot of what I loved about food was actually people. That a lot of what I loved about food was the relationships that happen around a table or that are cemented around a table. I love the conversation. I love the way it feels to sit at a table with people I care about. And I hadn't realized that was as much a part of it to me as the food itself. So needless to say, I didn't leave college. I didn't go to culinary school. I finished up my 8 weeks at Green's and had, of course decided I was not supposed to be a chef. And I moved to Seattle after college, and I started graduate school Social Security system, which, as you can see, I am not studying anymore. About 2 days before I started school, I got a phone call from my dad saying that he'd been having sort of this mysterious, been having a lot of pain. And it turned out that he had been diagnosed with cancer. And yeah, I mean, this was 2 days before I started graduate school, and so I stayed in school for the first 3 or 4 weeks, and then I went home to join with my family in taking care of him for the last 6 weeks that he was around. And we did a lot of cooking during that time, but more than anything, I spent a lot of time thinking about him and about his career. My dad was 73 when he got sick, and he was still working 4 days a week. He had only recently gone down to 4 days a week. He loved his job. He didn't want to stop, and he saw patients the day that he was diagnosed. And I thought to myself, I want to know what that's like. I want to know what it's like to have a job that I don't want to leave, a job that is so much a part of me and so much a part of who I am, and it is my life, and that I never want to stop. Everybody told me not to make any big changes after he died, and so I sort of stayed put. I didn't know, what on earth my sort of career might be in the way that that his was medicine. He was a doctor. But about a year and a half after he died, almost exactly to the day, I went to France to do some pre-dissertation research. That was sort of the wonderful thing about studying the French Social Security system, was having like a legitimate excuse to go to France. And I was supposed to be there for 5 weeks, and the timing was perfect. The French National Assembly, which is their legislature, was debating Social Security reform, and everybody wanted to talk about it. There were posters on the street. I mean, even like a cab driver wanted to talk about it. If you were riding with him for like more than 5 blocks, you would wind up talking about it. I tried to do my work, but about a week into it, I looked at my field notebook, and I realized that it was full of addresses for bakeries, that it was not full of interviews or really valuable information to the world of anthropology. It was full of addresses for bakeries. And I think I was far enough away from anything that might hold me back or anybody who might say no, and I said, you know what? I can't pretend anymore. I need to quit this. I need to stop doing this. I need to leave grad school. And so I did. And I sat down and had coffee with a friend of mine who's a journalist in Paris. I wanted to pick his brain because I thought, I sort of had this crazy dream that maybe someday I could write for a food magazine. But I had nothing to show for myself except for these like terrible jargon-filled grad school papers. And so I sat down with my friend, and I had sort of decided that while I was in the business of doing scary things, like leaving graduate school, that I really needed to go towards something that also scared me, and that was food, of course. And writing seemed like a natural part of that. For as much writing as I had done as a teenager, I'd been really afraid of depending on it for a living. And I think that, depending on creativity can be a daunting thing, and I wasn't sure that I could trust it. So I thought, if we're doing scary things here, let's do 2 at once. Let's try to get back into writing and do something with food. And so my friend wisely said, why don't you start a blog? Not only will it hold you accountable to practicing writing, to get back into writing. If you're out in this public place, you can't exactly just stop. So it would be good in that way, and it would also just give me a place to sort of work out what interested me so much about food. And so I came home from Paris, and the next day I started this blog called Orangette. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but very quickly I discovered that what I wanted to write about was in many ways the very same thing that I had discovered working in Greens that summer, and it was that I'm really interested in food in the natural context that we experience it. For me, food is never something that exists in a vacuum. The food to me comes with all sorts of people and voices and memories and conversations. I wanted to explore the way in which food really informs who we are, and the way in which through food we say a lot about